Hey gang, welcome back to Blendrix Audio Academy. This is Blendrix. I just got my hands on a copy of Ableton Live 9 Studio, the beta version. One of the ways I would recommend if you're looking to try to get your hands on a copy of it, I know that the beta program has been really hard to get into, mainly because as soon as they open it up, it fills up and then they close it again. So what I did was I went and I found a browser plugin that would monitor a web page that I specify for changes and then notify me on the hour if the page had changed. And I pointed it directly at the beta programs page on Ableton's website. So basically, you know, within the hour of them opening up the beta program, I got a notification in my browser saying, hey, you need to go download it now. So if you're looking to get your hands on a copy, do that, and you should be able to get in front of a bunch of the other people who kind of hear through the grapevine. All right, well, I'm not going to be doing the feature set of Ableton Live 9 yet, because I'm still kind of exploring it all myself and want to make sure that I really understand everything myself before I try to pass on the knowledge to you. But what I did want to give you today is the second version of my Blendrix Audio Academy production template. This is a way for you to have all of the defaults for what you want loaded up when you first open the program. You can basically save it into your live session so that whenever you load up, it gives you everything that you see here, and then I'll kind of guide you through on what all this means. It really speeds up the process of production when you're able to have something like this, so that when you have a creative spark, you can open up the program and begin working on music right away, rather than having to do all of the kind of logistical stuff in advance. So let me just kind of give you a quick little tour of the way Live is set up here, in case you haven't seen my other videos. In preferences, the way you would take this template and turn it into your default is by going into the preferences menu here, and then down under this file folder tab, you see where it says save current set as default. If you click that save button, it will actually take everything that you're working on and then put it in so that when you open up a new project, brand new, untitled, it will show up with all of the things you see on the screen here. So definitely recommend downloading this template and then saving it as your default. Let me walk you through all the stuff that's in here. A lot of things are similar to a previous production template that I've been working on for Live 8, but what I did was I went through and found all the places where there are compressors and upgraded them, because there's a new upgraded compressor in Live 9, and then I kind of optimized it a little bit more based on some of the experiences I've had recently. And I think that it's kind of headed the right direction now. So first of all, you got your drums. I've got pretty much everything is grouped. You can see here I'll be expanding things throughout, and I'll explain what all that stuff is and why it's grouped here in a minute. But so when something's grouped like this, it means all the individual channels in here, you can see all the instruments and the effects that are being applied to them. And then the signal from each of those goes through the group out to the master bus. So percussion and the drum rack are both going to be processed with this drum parallel compressor, plus this they'll go through this spectrum analyzer and this this utility plugin. So but more importantly, I wanted to go over the drum rack, because this is a really essential part of any template that you're going to be using for production, because the drums are one of the things that takes the most time to set up, and they're really tedious if you don't have a good workflow in place for it. So this drum rack took me probably 8 hours of just going through the really nitty-gritty, just very, very repetitive work of lining up everything that's in here and being able to automate the selection of different samples using these knobs here. So this is especially really useful if you have something set up with an 8-pad drum, like a drum pad type of thing, like a Akai LPD8 is what I think is one of the most useful ways to use this, because you've got 8 pads and you have 8 knobs to go along with those, and then each one of those knobs changes the sample that you're playing at any given point in time. So, you know, you can have two separate kick samples playing in the same, you know, without changing anything, two separate snare samples, and then I've got open hats, closed hats, crashes, and rides. What you would do is you'd grab, you know, say you've got a favorite, well, what I did for each one of these ones is I put in 10 separate places where you could drop a sample, and then I did that for kick 1 and kick 2. The same thing with snares, snare 1 and snare 2. Same thing with hats, open hat and closed hat. Any of these things, there's going to be 10 total possible samples that you can choose from. Now you could put more in there if you wanted to, but you're going to have to go in and change the chain selector stuff there so that it actually will evenly distribute them. We can go over that another time, and I actually think I did cover that in another tutorial, which really doesn't change much between as far as the chain selector stuff. That doesn't really change much between 8 and 9. So, but really to get down to the point of things here, so we've got kick 1, kicks. Both of the kicks here are processed through this same chain called kicks. The benefit to this is that when you're doing a side chain on your bass later, see where it says on the compressor for this bass, it says audio from the drum rack, and then within that it says drum rack kicks pre-effects. That means that either kick, doesn't matter if they're both playing at once or separately, either one will actually trigger this compressor through the side chain. That's an incredibly important feature, and having it set up this way allows you to have a little more variety in the way that you're you do your drum programming, and you know, have some kicks that are stronger than others, and really you don't really need to worry too much about it. You can add you could add a third kick and a fourth kick, whatever other things you want, as long as they all show up under this channel here, they'll all be processed through that compressor. So to get back to the selector part, the way you would do this is you come over here to this section, and on each one of these, you see if I click on each one, it has a simpler here. Now I've set this up so that anybody with live can use it. Typically when I'm actually doing a track that I'm producing myself, I'll switch these simplers out for samplers, which is a slightly more advanced sample engine that's built into Live, and that happens to come with Live Suite, which is the upgraded version of Ableton Live. If you don't happen to have Suite, this template should still work for you. I've designed it with specifically with instruments that do come with Live, the standard edition, ready to go. So you're not going to hear sounds here because I basically I turned off all the sounds from the program to try to keep this tutorial pretty simple. But I could take individual samples. Say I wanted this kick for my kick 1-1. I'd drop this one on there. Then kick 1-2. And say I want that one there. And I want kick 1-3. And then basically, whenever I play kick 1, if this sample selector is all the way to that part there, whenever I play kick 1, you'll see it only plays the first sample there. Now if I move this so that it's pulling from the second one, hitting kick 1, see how that plays this second sample. That's a really important thing to have because you can put 10 different samples in here and 10 different samples in your kick 2, and the same thing with your snares, hats, and cymbals. What I would do, you know, for setting this up for the first time on your machine would be to go and find your best samples and distribute them evenly throughout all of these blank spots that I've left open for you here. And then that way, as you're designing your drum patterns, you can say, okay, well, a kick goes here, a snare goes here, here's some rides, a crash, and closed hats, open hats. And then you can just turn these knobs while the sample is while the MIDI clip is playing in a loop, and you can turn the knobs until you say, okay, now I don't like that sound there, I don't like that sound there. Oh wow, that sounds great right there. Okay, great. Now move another one until you find the exact combination of the different samples that you want to achieve the best that you can get. Now, the one thing that this kit doesn't do is layering of samples. Aside from the fact that you do have kicks 1 and 2. So what you could do is you could use the 1 as you could put all your really low bassy kicks into this set, and you could put all your more sort of snappy, punchy kicks up in this set, and then pretty much just always play them together, play kick 1 and 2 at the same time. If you did that, then of course you'd be losing some of the potential variety of having 2 different kicks that you could choose from in the same track. If you did want to layer your kicks within the rack, what you would do is you come over here, and let's say this is kick 1. You group this, and then you have the opportunity to duplicate that chain, which now means you have 2 different kicks that would play every time this is triggered. Both of these will play. So that's all you have to do. If you do want to layer your kicks a little more, you can always just go to the here. I'll do that process in reverse once, so you can show you how that happens again. So on, say you've decided I just want kick 1 -1 to be the one that I play. You come over here and you click on that simpler that you have in there. You right click on it, and then you go to group right here, which is also Control G on the PC or Apple G on the Mac, and then it will give you this instrument rack. What you do is you expand the chain selector, and then you go to the chain and you right click here and you say duplicate. You can also do Apple D or Control D on the PC, and then that will create 2 separate chains. What you would do here is you would go in and you could add some EQ stuff here that would allow you to say, if you wanted this one to be the high and you wanted this one to be the low, you would add an EQ over here that gave you just the highs, and you would add an EQ here that gave you just the lows. So that's how you would do that if you wanted to do drum layering. Like, this is designed to be a simplistic layout that doesn't have too much complexity, so that you can kind of tailor it to your needs. But I wanted to give you something that had a lot of the mundane work taken out of it, so that you can pretty much just jump in and do the more exciting stuff. Another thing you'll notice here is that I've added, you can see a kick compressor here. This is just basically the preset for the compressor that's designed to compress kicks, and that comes if you're over here in the audio effects under compressor. You can see where it says drums -kick compressor. I just drop that in here, and what this is doing is basically, you see down here, these are ways you can add effects to the individual chains within a drum rack. So here I'm adding parallel compression, because you can do, this is a dry wet signal here, so it's basically send and return channels within the drum rack. Instead of having to use the returns out here, you're able to achieve these parallel processing within the rack. So the kicks have their own compressor, and the snares have their own compressor, and that's set up with the snare compressor preset. The hats, I don't have anything preset in here because I didn't want to really put things a little too overboard. But one thing I would suggest with your hats and with your cymbals would be to take, and this is another thing, I'll go over the return channels at another point later on in the tutorial here, but the exciter that I have on here, which is basically just a bit warmer, which is a basic wave shaper. we can route the signal from the hats, and we can actually send part of that out here. The way to do that is to go down here, right click in this open area, create return chain. And you go over here where it says audio 2, send it to the exciter. And I would, in this case, name it like this. And then another good thing to do is to give it the same color scheme as the one that's out there, just so you have a, you know, kind of a point of reference that you know where that's pointing when you're just kind of looking at it. So right now, see where it says send A, they're turned all the way down to infinitely negative decibels. So there's nothing, no signal going to this exciter. But if you were to turn these up, then you're going to have some signal going from each of these through the exciter chain, and some of it going through dry as well. So it's automatically parallel processed. I would do the very same thing with the cymbals and have them processed through the exciter as well. Exciters are a really great way to add some sizzle to the higher elements of your mix. I'll leave these in here when I upload this, so you do have these automatically. Here's another thing that a lot of people don't really cover in their tutorials, which I think is a really nice thing to know about. See where it says choke here? Basically, the choke group is if you're playing a sound from this one and this one starts playing, if the two of them are in the same choke group, the second sound will silence the first sound. That's really, really useful in cases like hats, because, especially with hi-hat, when you're playing an open hat, you can't be playing a closed hat, and when you're playing a closed hat, you can't be playing an open hat, etc., etc. So I usually put these both on the same choke group, because if the open hat is playing and then I play a closed hat, I want it to completely silence, cut short the open hat's sound. That's an incredibly, it's a good way to get a realistic live drummer sound if you're having some back and forth play in between open and closed hats. So I'd recommend really playing around with that and getting the right feel for it. Just kind of evening up these numbers here. All right. Oh, there we go. Exciter. Okay. So that pretty much covers the drum rack. Every one of these things is set up exactly the same as the others. You just go and drop samples in. Remember to drop it on the simpler that shows up when you click on it. If you try to drop them all in here at once, then all of these things will get messed up. You want to individually select which one you want to drop it on. Bring it in down here. Okay. Moving on over to the percussion section. I usually keep the drum rack. The reason that I've got these two separated like this is because the drum rack tends to be my main stage drum sounds, the ones that are really big. They're definitely right in your face. They're mostly sort of in the center of the mix. Percussion tends to be more kind of like shakers and rattles and chimes and other things that add rhythmic elements to the track, but they don't really consist. They're not the strong elements that would that you would consider to be the main drum set. So I put them on a separate channel here because I want to process them differently. The drum rack itself, if you look over here, we've got a total width on this channel of 100%. Which means that it's, you know, pretty much just normal, with the exception of, if you look over here in the kicks, I've actually got a utility on here where the width is 0, which means the kicks come straight down the center channel. There's no stereo panning to them whatsoever. You're gonna want it that way. You can play with the stereo panning and some of these other things. You may want to do a little more stereo panning with some of the other elements, but you want to keep those kicks really straight down the center. With the percussion, I've actually got the width turned all the way up to 200%, so it's really out there in the stereo field. By having it set up like this, and if you put together an entire drum set with sounds from all different frequencies within the spectrum, as well as the stereo panning from all the different areas of the stereo field, you'll have a very full sounding drum set. So, and then there's some parallel compression that's being set up on the percussion, some pretty gentle stuff. You know, same thing with the drum rack. I believe there's a gentle limiter on this drum rack as well. You can play around with the presets that there are on these things. I honestly at this point haven't even had a chance to go through and see how all these things sound right yet, but I was kind of going based on the names that I see there. I believe I know kind of what they're designed to do, so I usually just kind of go with the way that Ableton's designed their stuff to begin with, and then make changes as necessary. So I'm going to go ahead and collapse the drums now since we're done working on those. So this is another thing that I've been doing recently. Every one of my instruments, I've found a really good way to make them really dynamic and more expressive is to add multiple voices to each instrument. So this bass one has 3 separate instruments that'll play at the same time. Now bass 1 _ A this is voice A, voice B, and then the S means for subwoofer. And you see each one of these has its own EQ. So A is this one up here, B is and they're both in the same frequency. But if you go down here to the S, then it's definitely down there in the lower frequency ranges. This is a crossfade. That's what the X fade means, a crossfade. It's an A-B crossfade. So if I turn it all the way to the left, I suppose it should say B-A. I'll just reverse these like this. So if it's turned all the way to the left, it's selecting just A. If I turn it all the way to the right, it's selecting just B. And I shouldn't say just A and just B because it's the whole time I'm going to be playing S. But as I move it back and forth between these two, it gradually fades out A as I move it from left to right and fades in B while keeping S playing. So with these, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll put in, like for S, I'd put in a subwoofer type thing. So that would be, say, operator, if you've got Live Suite. If you don't, there's analog. There's also, I mean, a lot of third-party plugins you can get that'll do nice sub bass. Native Instruments Massive is one of my favorites for doing sub bass. But basically, you just select which channel you want to put the instrument on, and you come over here and you know, just for the sake of doing it, I'm going to come in here and grab a bass. Let's see here, sub sine bass. That's a good sub bass. And you just drop it there. Boom. Now I've got a sub bass there. Now watch, if I click here, it goes away. And now I'm going to have another thing to choose from. So I could go up here and say, all right, well, I want this one to be that one, and I want this to be that one. Now, as I move this from left to right, if it's all the way over here on the left, it'll be using this Bofner bass as the preset. And as it gradually moves to the right, it'll transition to where it's pulling more from this club amp bass. And it'll continue playing this sub 2 sine bass the whole time. And so I can make automation that uses this and changes things around, and I can also add more effects later on down the chain and group them in with the rest of this and actually tie them all in with the same knob so that it becomes a much more dynamic and very powerful source of automation. Okay, so assuming that I hadn't even added those, let's see here. All right, we're back to square one there. This sub crossover is the point at which the sub is phased out and the regular sounds are phased in. So if I've got the sub crossover way down, that means you're barely going to hear the sub bass, mostly what you're going to be hearing is the other two characters. If I turn this up, then you're going to hear more of the sub bass coming through. This is a crossover. I wish it would show both at the same time, but what I'm doing is I'm turning this one knob, and it's macroed to this frequency knob and to this frequency knob and to this frequency knob, so that no matter where I put this, that is going to be at the same point in the overall frequency range. See how that 2 is exactly at the same position as where the 1 is. So that really gives you a very powerful tool. You can see you just adjust this as your notes are playing. You go, okay, that's exactly the range that I want. You can also use this as modulation that gives you more character as the track goes on. You can have at certain parts of the track, you can have it crossed over here. Another part of the track you could have it cross over here, and another part you can have it here. And that gives you more variety in your sound. So you have to do less sound design and more just kind of move a knob from one place to another. And as long as you've got some good solid characters that you're playing here, as you morph between these different sounds, you'll get really interesting changes. So the very same thing applies on bass 2. There's nothing different about this one except for the fact that it's a different color and all of them are named differently. That's to kind of help you keep track of it all. So other than that, identical. On each of those channels, there is the compressor that is already side-chained to the kick on the drum rack. So keep that in mind. Oh, another thing is the bass. Basses 1 and 2, you are always going to want these to come pretty much straight down the middle, with a little bit of side panning. And actually, that's what this is. If you look here, you'll see where it says bass A, B, and S. The sub bass is the one you want to come straight down the middle, and that is basically this is the panning. C means centered. Bass 1A and bass 1B are panned 3 degrees to the left and right, respectively. That means that you're going to have a little more stereo play here, and if you add a little bit of texture to those, it'll create this really cool effect of having slightly different sounds in each ear. So if you look at the overall bass, you are getting a compressor that's compressing all of it, but you're getting some stereo panning here from each of those. And then on this one, see where we can actually click on individual channels here, and you're seeing the EQ curve for each of those down here as well. You see where when I click on this one, the utility at the end of this one says 0 width, whereas the other ones say 100% width. That's just to make sure that sub bass is coming through the center channel without getting bounced around to the sides at all, because sub doesn't really do well in the stereo field. Same thing as the kicks. All right, so same thing you're going to see on both of those. Leads. Very similar concept here to what we had on the sub basses, except with these, I didn't really keep any one particular sound present throughout the whole thing, which gives you even more dynamism. And with this, there's actually two different crossovers. There's, you're looking at A is the low frequencies, B is the mid frequencies, and C is the high frequencies. And then you can use these crossovers here to give yourself, let's see, I'll show you with this one here. This one changes the mid-high crossover, and this one changes the low-mid crossover. And then this one, of course, does the same thing as before, chooses where it's coming from. This one's panned 2 degrees to the right on B and 2 degrees to the left on C. Again, with A, since this was the lowest end of the spectrum, we want to keep that center panned. Even though most of the time your leads are not going to be in the low spectrum, you still want to keep your lowest stuff pretty well centered. So I encourage you to play around with these settings here, drop different instruments in each of these. You know, try putting if you've got massive, put it in here, and if you've got operator, put it in here, and if you've got, you know, something else, say albino or you know, analog or any of these other plugins you might use for a lead, drop different instruments in here and try to get it so that each one of them has a similar volume level, and you can do that by adjusting your utility at the end of each channel here. You know, you can use the gain knob to give you a little more control over that. But once you get them all to be about the same volume level, and as you move this crossfader around, you get some really cool, interesting transitions between different sounds. So the lead channel, both lead channels, are sidechain compressed to the drum rack, and then under that it says it's coming from the snares. So either snare 1 or snare 2 will cause the lead 1 or lead 2 to duck out of the way for a short term, just to make sure that it so that the snare comes through nice and clear. Okay, so that's how the leads work. They're both identical, other than that they're named the same, named differently and colored differently. Vocal processing. This would be where you drop in samples of vocals for a track. The clean channel here, as you can see, has nothing on it except for a spectrum analyzer and utility. With vocals, you usually want to have them pretty well centered, not necessarily completely centered, which is why I've got the width set to 50%. Experiment with that a little bit and see if you see what sounds exactly right for this. But remember, this is the clean signal, so you really don't want to be doing too much to morph it up too much. But with the vocal effects, you basically take the same samples that you would have in this channel and you play them over here, but you're running these ones through a different set of effects. And you could chop these ones up. You can throw different effects chains on here. I've got a default effects chain that's built into Live called Vocal Crunch, and this will just give you a pretty nice crunchy sound for the default. But you can add more effects to it. You could put a phaser, flanger, gate effects, whatever you want to put on there. With the effects vocals, usually I end up panning those a little bit more into the stereo field because they tend to be the more ethereal parts of the mix. You'll also notice using this EQ here that some of the more high parts of this are being accentuated, so you do want to have those kind of panned out a little bit. So that's why I have the width set to 150%. Okay, and then overall on the vocal bus, the group, there is a mix gel which is designed to sort of just make these two kind of come together. It glues them together, not the same way that the glue, this new compressor they have in Live 9, but it is designed to sort of squish them together without really squashing them. Hard to put that in a way that makes a lot of sense, but you'll get it once you start. You can do like an A/B when you're listening to the vocals by themselves, playing them all at once. Turn this on and off doing this, and you'll hear how everything kind of sticks together better when you have that turned on. Okay, so I'm going to collapse that and move on. Me, I use a guitar in almost all my tracks, and so I do like to have a guitar processing thing on here. You don't necessarily have to have this, but it might be another way for you to add some other samples in here that you might want to put through different effects types. So on here I've got a, this is a particular type of lead guitar sound. This is a different kind of lead guitar sound. And then this is one that's designed to be more like rhythm guitar, which is kind of the strumming, chug-a-chug-chug kind of sounds that you would get out of a, in a band scenario. And you've got your leads 1 and 2. Oh, I forgot to point this out. You can see here where lead 1 and lead 2 are panned left and right by 8 degrees. You'll see the same thing on pretty much all of the different parts here. The basses, these ones are panned 3 degrees, these ones are panned 5, 2, 8, 8. I tried to go back and forth on them, the basses I had so that this one's panned to the left, this one's panned to the right, this one's panned to the right, and this one's panned to the left. they try to alternate them back and forth so that nothing is too overwhelming in one direction or the other. But what it does is make sure that your stereo field is really occupied by a lot more of your sound. By panning it out like that, you can actually get quite a bit more headroom to play with. So I did the same thing with the guitars. This is a sample, basically just for dropping in samples that don't really fit into the vocal category. They're not guitars, they're just other samples. Please don't use an air horn. I didn't tell you to use an air horn. Do not use an air horn. But you could put in anything else here. You could have you know, the samples of that Jamaican guy saying something that nobody really understands, but everybody thinks it sounds cool. So that's... Oh, here's another thing to point out. You can see across the board here, I've got -12 dB as the standard threshold for every one of these. And then I've also got this set to -6. By doing this, I'm getting a really, really low starting level. And if you start really low, it gives you a lot of room to build things up before you start running out of headroom. Ideally, you want to have everything pretty quiet when you're working on it before you actually go to the mastering stages, because you can always add more gain later on to get it up to the point where it is mastering worthy. But before that, you want as much headroom as you can possibly have to play with. So this is what's called gain staging. I'm putting a negative gain on everything just from the get-go so that everything starts that way. And then I can add later on if I need to. But by removing 12 dB here and removing 6 dB over here, it really gives me a lot of extra space to play with. You will notice when I expand each one of these groups, though, that the subgroups, the parts of each group are set at 0 for their gain. And the reason for that is that if I were to gain stage those back as well, then you would really hardly be able to hear anything at all. So most of the time, you aren't going to need to change the gain stuff individually on these parts. Although if you pick a particular part that just really drowns the rest of them out, I would recommend using the utility to dial it, you know, up or down, because you can actually automate these with clip envelopes without messing up some of your automation stuff out here in the session view. But that's what the gain staging is for. You just want to have all that stuff turned down to keep your headroom nice and plentiful. So over here, this is a noise generator. I designed this little. It basically takes a couple instances of the analog synth, and then it's running them through, you know, like a hard LFO type of thing and a soft LFO type of thing. The best thing for you to do is to try this out. Drop a MIDI clip in here and then put notes in and play it. Come over here and actually adjust the distance knob and the panorama knob and the frequency, and just play around with those things and see what kind of sounds you can get. It's designed to sound kind of like a helicopter, but you can get all kinds of stuff out of it by messing around with different things. And this is just a way to kind of demonstrate the power of automation and macro knobs and live. So yeah, play with that when you get a chance. All right. The last one here, this is sort of a unique thing that I've been doing. I haven't really seen a lot of other people doing it, but when people say, hey, so how do you make those glitchy sort of stuttered effects in your leads and bass lines? I said, well, if I got a bass that has a really slow attack and a slow release, I can't make a stuttered bass using that that sound. You know, or I have to change the attack and release settings whenever I wanted it to stutter, and that would be kind of a pain in the butt. So what I do on those situations is I put a gate on the channel, and just for demonstration purposes here, I'm gonna drop a gate toward the end here. From the audio effects, you go to gate, drop that in. I usually put it like after everything else. Expand it, get the side chain, and then take the audio input from, and in this case, these are called triggers. Trigger 1. And then I'm going to arm that, and I'll show you what this looks like. Come on. Okay, see how this little line comes up? That means that you would normally be hearing sound coming through here, but like I said, I have it turned off just for kind of brevity's sake. See this? Every time I hit that key, this thing goes up. And whenever it crosses that line, it allows sound to come through this channel. Whenever that line is not being crossed, no sound comes through. These are all muted, and what each one of them has on it is just an analog plugin that's set up with a noise generator. That's a white noise plugin, and it's set up with a square, completely just on or off. There's basically almost no time on the attack or release. You can see 5 milliseconds is the bare minimum. So by doing that, if I were to have a bass note playing right now, and I were to do this, it would go that kind of thing. So you can really use that to a drastic effect. I mean, you can have one set of one set of notes here that's generating a gate pattern, and you can apply that gate to several different instruments. You could also have, I have it set up so that you can have 3 different sets of triggers going at the same time. So one set of gates is controlling one, another one is controlling a different one. You really open up a lot of potential possibilities by doing that, and especially in electronic music, the glitch stuff is incredibly popular, and I think it gives you a lot more chance to create interesting soundscapes by doing that. So try that out and see how you like using that. Otherwise, I mean, you don't really need to keep that in there. You can just delete it if you don't think you're going to use it. But I find it's a very, very useful thing to have in my arsenal. So that covers all of the stuff in the instrument section here. I'm just going to do a quick little overview of the stuff that's over here in the return channels, and we'll be done. So this is the short delay. This is just a strip, a channel strip that has a really short delay time on it. It's a 4-beat delay. You could change it to 2 if you wanted to, or you could even turn off the sync, and you could set really short delays so that it's like a slapback delay kind of thing. That's really up to you. I think that a good way to leave it is just there, because the long delay is a 6. And so if you were to put a little bit of short delay and a little bit of long delay on a particular signal, then you get this cool sort of call and answer, bouncing back and forth kind of. It's a neat sound. Try adding both of those effects in different amounts to the same channel, and you can change using these strips. I've got these things again. These are macro knobs, so you can change where the low cut lands. So you're getting, just the really high stuff, or you can get some of the lows in there too. Same thing applies on each one of these. There's this is adjusting the feedback. This is adjusting the overall width of the echo. This is a reverb. Same thing with the low cut width. But this is a reverb is different from a delay, and the delay sounds like an echo, or it sounds exactly like the way you expect echoes to sound, like in cartoons or yodeling and things like that, where the exact same sound comes back to you. Whereas reverb is a little more the way that you might expect an echo to sound inside a warehouse, where you make a sound and then it makes this kind of you hear the parts of the sound sort of spiraling back to you, but they're not. It's not crisp. It doesn't bounce back the same way that it went back out. So short reverb is a small room. Long reverb is a big room. And then the exciter, as we talked about earlier, is just a way to add some harmonic distortion to the higher frequency stuff to give a little bit of sparkle. On the master bus, we've got master bus EQ. This is what you would be doing your final adjustments in your EQ before sending it completely out to the speakers. This is a mastering compressor that's designed just to basically give you a good, well, with the attack dial all the way down, there's basically a limiter. So, you know, you probably want to start with it turned off to make sure that you're not messing up your mixing to begin with. But you can add that at the very end to sort of add some polish to it. And you can use this spectrum analyzer to sort of watch what your spectrum stuff is doing. I added this this DC filter at the end here just to make sure that if there is any sort of DC noise coming through, that this will make sure that it gets cleared out before it actually comes out to your speakers. So that's pretty much the whole thing. Please do hit me up in the comments here on YouTube. You can also follow me on Facebook. That's facebook.com/Blendrix, twitter.com/Blendrix. You can also visit my website, blendrix.com, and you can download a lot of my tracks for free, the ones that I've released for free, and that's been pretty much all of them up to this point, except for one or two. So please give me feedback on the video if you think there's anything missing, or if you found better ways to do certain things, or if you think I missed something. I'd be glad to make annotations afterwards. So thanks so much for watching, and have a great day.